Tom and Denise are great farmers, but they're even more than that. And I think that what they have brought is a humanity, a hope, a love of people and neighbors. And if I could say that there was a quintessential organic farmer, the ones that we would want to be, if the golden book, the little children's book, were to write a book called The Organic Farmer, it would be Tom and Denise Willey's place. That would be the golden book farm.
Yesterday, there was some young people over at our house. There was a young Latina girl that does work in Madera County. And she, out of the blue, says, you know, I've been advocating at the school district. And she goes, you know, there's this farmer that keeps showing up at the school district and advocating with us. And I go, what's his name? I already knew what his name was. It was Tom Willey. A young Latina organizer is talking about Tom Willey at the school district when his kids have been out of the schools for quite some time. We know Tom and Ines because of Slow Food Madera, because of the Stone Fruit Jubilee. If you go to the Eagle Farm, look at how people see Tom and Ines. There's a lot of young people there, and it's with adulation and respect that only comes from a reputation that's way beyond our valley. So we've had scholars, is it Joe? So Joe, we've had people come here and talk about Paul Taylor. We've had people talk about the Goldschmidt study. Tom went through the dissertation and put pieces in it, and then has interviewed all of these scholars that have come here, and how appropriate that we now have a sociologist trained at Berkeley who came here and did the right kind of agriculture, the right kind of scale with integrity. It's like welcoming somebody that's in our family to come and tell us about his life at this precise moment when Tom and Ines are going to be retiring. So it's a great honor for us to be welcoming them here and to learn again from them. Thank you, Tom.
Guys are landed on thick, so.
Yeah, so this better be good.
Keep an eye out for the thumbs down or up. Like Trudy, a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to ask your permission to read from a text. Good. Because my memory serves me well enough to know my own name, and even some of yours once in a while. But there's no way that I could have committed this to memory tonight, and so with your permission, I will read. This gathering, for quite a few weeks now, re-examines some extraordinary contributions to activist scholars towards bringing into existence a family farm-based agrarian economy and society envisioned in the Progressive Era's 1902 Newlands Reclamation Act. To better understand why that noble democratic design is largely unrealized across present-day San Joaquin Valley farmscapes, I'd like to rewind the film a bit to review this complex issue from a deeper historical perspective. One of the planet Earth's few geographical features clearly visible from outer space is California's Great Central Valley, our home. 8 times longer than its 50-mile width, about the size of England, the valley's 15 million acres appears so level that one could imagine it filled with water instead of soil. As a matter of fact, it was. Today's vast prairie-like trough, encircled by mountains, was a deep marine trench some 5 million years past, a result of tectonic plates dancing on the edge of a future North American continent. An expansive inland sea this was, connected to a yet unknown, unnamed Pacific Ocean. Aquatic creatures, among them the Fresnosaurus, and that's no joke, plied the deep waters of this very neighborhood before before any human form shone as a glint in any eye. The massive tilted block of Earth's crust to our east, we call the Sierra Nevada, did not sculpt Yosemite and Kings Canyon granite cathedrals in a single try. At least one, if not two precursors of our present Sierra were uplifted many millions of years ago. As seawater retreated, those ancient peaks eroded into sordid alluvium, refilling that marine trench with this deep, productive soil upon which we build our homes and from which we feed the world. Just a mere 2 million years ago, slam-dancing tectonic plates raised the present Sierra like a great trapdoor, creating the mountain majesty and its generous watershed which sustain us yet. The earliest human immigrants to stake a claim on North American soil came over the frozen Bering Strait from Asia some 15,000 years ago. Gradually spread over the continent, these first pioneers recognized a great location and climate, just as we do, and settled disproportionately in California. When our European ancestors arrived some time later, fully 1/10 of North America's 3 million natives resided in what is now the Golden State. Considering the popularity of California real estate over 13 millennia, why did our European ancestors not encounter a complex farming civilization on what we would quickly develop into the richest agricultural region in world history? 16th century Spanish conquistadores mistook California for a land surrounded by water, which they subsequently named after the mythical island paradise, Califia. While hundreds of years later, Carrie McWilliams similarly described Southern California as an island on the land in a 1946 book of that title. California's geography, 14,000-foot peaks and vast deserts to the east, Pacific Ocean on the west, isolated the densest native population on the continent from agricultural societies that dominated the rest of pre-Columbian North and South America, those based on corn, bean, squash, potato, sunflower, peanut, and cotton. Popular images of horseback-mounted buffalo-chasing American Indians belie the truth that sophisticated agricultural systems undergirded the existence of as many as 100 million indigenous people on 2 continents at the time of Europeans' first arrival. Systems that collapsed as never before encountered old world diseases, rapidly decimated native populations by an estimated 90% within a century or less. Native Californians had found no need to plant seeds over 13,000 years preceding Spanish colonization. Their island on the land's mild climate and diverse geography generously provided ample plant and animal sustenance for 300,000 souls without resort to laborious farming or herding. Mountain Maidu, Yosemite National Park Ranger Ben Cunningham Summerfield describes indigenous peoples' active management of California's wild food cornucopia as proto-agriculture. By local example, their system employed low-intensity fire about every 20 years in the Kings River watershed just above us to maintain forest density 1/10 of today's, the openness of which encouraged nutrient-rich grasses and forbs alleged to have hosted a deer herd of 250,000 in the same area that presently supports only 5,000. California's first agriculturalists in human history, 18th and 19th century Spaniards and Mexicans, clung to the coast, avoiding our interior valley, which they deemed an inhospitable moonscape that swallowed fugitive natives escaping enslavement at coastal missions. After a few military raids designed to replenish their diminishing workforce, early Californios gave up on this valley as too perilous, its inhabitants too ferociously independent. Indeed, as late as 1860, agriculturalist William H. Brewer, a member of Josiah Whitney's first geological survey of California, described our San Joaquin Valley as a plain of absolute desolation. Few European Americans took interest in homesteading the Central Valley's forbidding environment prior to 1849. Pastoralism or cultivation became near impossible when its landscapes were overrun by fevered gold seekers from all quarters of the globe, swelling California's modest non-native population from 12,000 to 300,000 by 1855. Well, someone had to feed all those Argonauts, hell-bent on deconstructing the Sierra Nevada for yellow metal. Tom and Denise Willey's 80-acre parcel and most environs west of our Madera farm town once belonged to a pair of gold rush German immigrants, Henry Miller and Charles Lux, who seized on that opportunity, amassing a 1.4 million acre late 19th century cattle and meat empire that spanned California, Oregon, and Nevada. Butcher's son Miller and partner Lux's land acquisition began in 1866 with the 9,000-acre Santa Rita Ranch, still identifiable along Highway 152 near Dos Palos, which the two wily businessmen bought for around $1 an acre. Well, Miller thereafter developed a voracious appetite for land acquisition, muscling Spanish land grants, scooping up discounted government-issued land script, and eagerly loaning money to property owners on whom he would later foreclose. Such massive holdings characterized an ownership pattern along the valley's trough, far south and west side, that would later come into conflict with the 1902 Reclamation Act's social engineering designs. Historian Donald Worster's classic 1982 environmental history, Rivers of Empire, argues that arid environments as extreme as our San Joaquin valleys, if not left relatively undeveloped, as explorer John Wesley Powell urged, are fated by nature to become a modern hydraulic society, a social order founded on the intensive management of water, controlled by power and money elites. Worcester cites historical hydraulic society precedents: Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China, dating from 3,000 years before Christ. Essentially, hydraulic society theorists trace through human history the domination of nature as an ambition that first appeared stark and unchecked in the archaic desert empires, and therefore that ambition, whenever it reoccurred as a compelling cultural idea, always associated with the domination of some people by other people. Worcester identifies three diversion plateaus, temporary delays that impeded California's trajectory towards presumed total mastery over nature or hydraulic society. First, immensely wealthy individuals like Henry Miller, even by joining forces with others of his stripe in corporate entities, were limited in the scale of river taming that they could accomplish. Next, as Central Valley bonanza wheat farms and cattle empires began to surrender some quarter to 40 and 80 acre agrarians desirous of a more democratic rural economy, California's 1887 Wright Act inaugurated an irrigation district era, the formation of quasi-governmental entities that could build common irrigation works and tax local residents to pay for them. By Worcester's account, hydraulic society's second tier thrived into the 1930s, during which time California's technologically innovative farmers ramped up specialty crop production while organizing such iconic branded cooperatives as Sunkist, Sun-Made, and Blue Diamond, among others, in response to increased demand from a rapidly industrializing marketplace. Profitability spurred unbridled acreage expansion that overran local irrigation district surface water capacities, while the electric pump's early century introduction resulted in groundwater aquifers sucked down to perilous levels by 1930, setting the table for California's third diversion plateau, from which Worcester explains, retrenchment or innovation were, as before, the only routes open. Well, with some level of apprehension, champions of irrigation's manifest destiny now turn to our United States federal government, the sole remaining entity that might marshal enough power and resources necessary to fully corral river waters yet wasted into the sea. Peddling a newly minted state water plan, California irrigation boosters cultivated the Bureau of Reclamation's insecure functionaries who were eager to back grandiose schemes on a scale equal to the Colorado River's just christened Hoover Dam, a project which represented their beleaguered bureaucracy's only notable achievement over 3 decades since its turn of the century inception. 1902's Reclamation Act was a child of the Teddy Roosevelt-led progressive era, during which Republicans spearheaded social activism and political reforms designed to rein in robber baron industrialists whose laissez-faire excesses had led to an 1873 economic depression lasting nearly a decade, followed by the panic of 1893 that further inflamed tensions between city and country, industry and agriculture. Progressives sought to diffuse these and insulate against popular insurrections by funding irrigation projects to reclaim arid western lands for the promotion of traditional homestead agrarianism. Schemes designed to realize the Reclamation Act's twin purposes, efficient development of nature's untapped resources, coupled with social engineering to further democracy, undertaken by a nascent bureau over its first 30 years, are described in Worcester's Rivers of Empire and Norris Hundley's The Great Thirst as largely failures. Facing extinction at the Great Depression's dawn, Bureau of Reclamation functionaries were eager to seize on the technological half of their mission, abandoning a more troublesome social purpose for the very survival of their bureaucracy. The federal government build-out of California's massive state water plan, thereafter renamed the Central Valley Project, alleviated some Great Depression unemployment as it commenced in 1937 and progressed incrementally over 4 decades, replumbing nature's deficits on a scale unequaled in human history. That era's hubristic bureau could have well adopted as its motto one engineer's boast: we enjoy pushing rivers around. CVP taps finally flowed onto the Westlands Water District's 600,000 arid acres from the San Luis unit in 1968. Cat and mouse games with the Act's provisions restricting federal water delivery to resident farms of no more than 160 acres played out over this entire period as California's cagey, large-scale irrigators, with the collusion of wink and nod Bureau Reclamation officials, successfully dodged their implementation. Well, this partnership in crime suffered just a few bumps in the road, one of which arrived with the near simultaneously publications of Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath and Carrie McWilliams' Factories in the Fields. A White Lives Matter moment in history, when immense sympathy for abused Dust Bowl farmer turned stoop laborer migrants aroused renewed cries for acreage limit implementation. Paul Taylor's efforts over ensuing decades, Goldsmith's now classic Arvin Danuba study, George Ballas's 1970s National Land for People Crusade, and other acreage limitation initiatives sometimes represented a skirmish or two won. The war has been lost. And if historical precedent serves as any predictor, per Worcester, this outcome was predetermined by California's arid geographical circumstance, by nature herself. Yanking up urban California roots, I struck out for the San Joaquin Valley in 1974, lured by a boast that its 5 million irrigated acres constitute the most productive agricultural real estate on this planet. I've never been disappointed in that boast. I had no intention of becoming involved in any organic farming revolution when I enrolled in agriculture courses at Fresno State University, assisted farm advisors at the local UC Cooperative Extension Office, and cut my first farming teeth on a sprawling 10,000-acre Newhall Land and Farming Company row crop operation in Merced County's El Nido. I had no reason to question chemically intensive methods that I'd been taught in Fresno State's classrooms or at the several farms on which I was subsequently employed, gaining valuable experience and working up the nerve to strike out on my own. During part of that apprenticeship, I field managed Rink Sano's 1,000-acre Westland Water District farm, miles west of Firebaugh and south of Dos Palos over then unpaved Fairfax Avenue. Sano's place, and much of Westlands, was dream soil, panoche loam, so rich you could eat it with a spoon. Bragged local farmers who commonly harvested crop yields twice those of any east side acreage. I was proud to land a job with that highly reputed Merced-based canning tomato farmer who passed away just last year at 91 years of age. Our styles didn't mesh, however, much less after, without forewarning, I announced my elopement with Dinesh and a fortnight's honeymoon disappearance to the Yucatan. I often refer to immensely abundant Westlands as a wasteland of production, for its built environment's inhospitality to human presence, well illustrated by perennial sidekick farmhand Luis Rios' tale of eating solitary lunches in a power pole shadow, the only comfort zone he could find. Contracted gangs of cotton choppers were delivered in windowless wooden boxes atop flatbeds designed to fool the migra, from which, like the circus clown car, sprang dozens of human souls to perform a hard day's field labor. Harvest and heavy tillage seasons were exhausting 24/7 affairs on West Side mega farms, where notorious Mendota produced most short-term driver recruits. Piloting giant Steigers overnight, these fellows ingested illicit substances against monotony. And the worst mine trips found land planes wrapped around power poles, or 3 points ripped from tractor rear ends by morning's light. Over some half dozen years, under the tutelage and watchful eyes of experienced conventional farmers who were not about to allow some fool ruin their life's investment, I learned how to avoid about 10 fatal mistakes that would doom a greenhorn cultivator's dream in short order. I knew the capital-intensive Wild West Side was not for me. So backed by my young wife Dinesh's newly minted nursing degree, in 1980, I rented, for 25 bucks an acre, a small 20-acre plot on Fresno's urbanizing east side where plenty of land sat idle in anticipation of the next building boom. I set about planting zucchini, green beans, and cherry tomatoes for Sunnyside Packing Company, a Selma organization that assembled and marketed the productions of dozens of contracted farmers. Though I avoided burning up Dinesh's salary, reserved for family expenses, profits were slim to non-existent. We had managed to rent that farm, purchase a 1957 Ford 900 high clearance vegetable tractor and put a down payment on a modest home with $10,000 in savings that I had religiously squirreled away from my farm foreman salaries. Those gigs taught me to produce endless truckloads of canning tomatoes on thousands of acres, reliant on equipment yards the size of my newly rented farm, full of tractors and farm implements of every description. I was now tasked with taming 20 weedy, sandy acres with nothing more than a 35 horsepower tractor and a 4.5-foot disc. Well, thank God for neighbors and the good sense to have located in a district populated by farmers and farm service providers, rather than on some isolated mountaintop. My continued education in gardening arts now advanced by the generosity of 2 neighborhood mentoring masters. Where my Olive Avenue dead-ended into Fancher Creek, I encountered a Mutt and Jeff pair of long-experienced market gardeners on opposite corners. On the north side, Japanese-American George Yagi meticulously tended vegetables on 5 acres of benched land above the road, while across the way, African-American Leon Poe cultivated 15 clay loam creekside acres. The steady streams of urban Fresnans, hungry after silver queen sweet corn and ace tomatoes, motored on to Poe's and Yagi's farms each afternoon once harvests were gathered. Hurried customers pulled into Yagi's unpaved circle drive, where taciturn, businesslike George handled transactions efficiently under a massive camphor tree shade, sometimes limiting small talk to a mere grunt or nod. Well, the more sociable types patronized Poe's gardens, where afternoons found Leon presiding over his realm from a tattered sofa next to the irrigation pump's cool stream. You'd be obliged to sit a spell while Poe spun some tales of earlier days, plying Louisiana swamps and working Arkansas cotton. Transplanted Southerner Leon Poe, descended from slaves, an American-born George Yagi, who spent the war years with his family in a concentration camp, shared equipment and their vast knowledge of market gardening with this starry-eyed greenhorn, who all but worshiped the ground they walked on. Another mentor was sweet potato grower Tom Falsoni, whose unguarded nature evolved into a relationship foundational to my farming success. Falsoni was one working fool, by his own admission, an innate habit shaped by Depression-era childhood experiences in Merced County's blow sand country. He bragged on his legless diabetic mom, who scootered herself along vegetable rows to put in a full day's weeding. An inveterate economizer, Tom coached me on farm equipment auction subtleties by which I acquired implements of husbandry for pennies on the dollar. Modestly educated Leon Poe's keep the ball rolling model of farm economics taught me how the proceeds from a cheap and fast-growing turnip crop could bankroll a more costly, lucrative tomato patch that yields fruit the summer long. His was a 12-month production scheme, taking advantage of the San Joaquin Valley's relatively mild climate, which enables seeding and harvesting some vegetable every day of the year. Poe's brilliance allowed us to ditch USDA financing, which required farmers to shoulder a frightening amount of indebtedness, and shift to just a small seed loan from Dad by our second year. A big breakthrough came when Governor Moonbeam, as a younger Jerry Brown was known in those days, bankrolled a farmer's market renaissance up and down the state, which set us off in a different marketing direction. We carved out a 2-acre market garden from our commodity crop 20, struck a partnership with Dad, freshly retired from the city of Los Angeles bureaucracy, and launched ourselves as produce retailers in as many as a half dozen Southern California open-air venues. Though our marketing prowess exceeded my production skills for several years, farmers markets gave us a much-needed leg up on profitability. In 1984, as Denise became obviously burdened by the stress of acute hospital work, I invited her to join the farming business, praying that we could make ends meet. She did so, and we have never looked back. The greatest salesperson on the planet is certain that her work providing fresh organic produce has been of greater benefit to the health of our community than were any of her varied nursing endeavors. But Denise and I quickly learned that highfalutin University of California degrees were worth exactamente nada when swinging hoes in a vegetable patch. The marketplace valued our farm labor at the same $3.35 an hour that we'd pay any bloke trampling rural roads in Ronnie Reagan's 1981 economy. So we hired such folks, mostly Michoacaners, who streamed across a semi-permeable international border in that era by their own wits, or for a mere $200 or so paid to local hometown coyotes. With no intention of growing other people's food for less than a middle-class income, we aggregated small margins of value that could be realized on the production of each minimum wage earner in our employ. Soon thereafter, I began reading about organic agriculture. Just as my unease was mounting over the need to apply more chemical fertility and pest control inputs to my farm each year, attempting to match the previous season's crop performance, something was amiss. The resiliency of our farm system was backpedaling. After several years of experimentation, T&D Willey Farms achieved certified organic status in 1987. But knowledge was shallow, quality inputs were scarce, and competent technical advice hard to come by. The university and larger farming community laughed at or belittled us. Growing high-quality produce utilizing organic methods in those days was quite difficult. But selling it to an appreciative public was much easier than it is today, now that industry status has been conferred upon our upstart good food movement. Though we gave up farmers marketing in 1998 for wholesale and CSA, colleagues report that the proliferation of outdoor venues in California's major urban centers necessitates attending about 3 markets to achieve the gross sales a farmer could amass in a single market 2 decades back. Over those first 15 years on 3 successive leased properties, we managed to save $100,000, which became the down payment on our present Madera farm, a purchase necessitated by the Clovis School District's relentless expansion onto our rented acres. By that time, I'd acquired enough experience to properly judge a piece of ground's productive potential and the adequacy of its water resources. The need to preserve certified organic status required some compromise, leading to our 1995 purchase of an 80-acre parcel of very high-quality soil 30 miles north, albeit in a district with less generous water supply than Fresno's. The price, $3,500 an acre. A diminishing retail presence in Los Angeles farmers markets continued while adopting a business guru maximum, there's always room at the top. We gradually carved out a high-quality niche for our T&D Willey label in the burgeoning markets for wholesale organic produce. My father proudly sold his son and daughters-in-law's vegetables to familiar Southern California customers who had become marketplace friends into his 80th year when he began to get lazy. This precipitated our retirement from the farmers market business, on which we had become less dependent by 1998. Henceforth, we focused on some 25 vegetable crops. Amongst those for which T&D Willey Farms became most noted were about 15 acres of snap beans and peas, until the expense of hand harvest became overwhelming, About 25 acres of double crop potatoes. When we hit the bell on the potato crop, that put some money in the retirement bank. About 7 acres of table and Roma tomatoes, 4 acres of eggplant, which Denise is still finishing up the harvest on the very last patch of production on our farm, eggplant. About 10 acres of Nance carrots, 5 acres of crookneck squash, about 3 acres of Savoy spinach, and more recently, 2 acres of Mediterranean cucumbers. Leon Poe's year-round production scheme that we evolved over decades provided multiple values: constant marketplace presence, the ability to attract and retain highly skilled, motivated, and loyal employees, 52-week cash flow, quick bounce back from adversity, and never getting any rest. Millennium's dawn found many a moderate-scale organic wholesale firm's margins squeezed by a rapidly consolidating marketplace. Like others, we sought refuge in the CSA business, where more faithful customers might not drop you over a nickel from one day to the next. We contemplated distributing in familiar Southern California, where membership could rapidly expand, but settled on serving our own region, within an hour's drive of the farm, most inhabitants of which had little, if any, access to organic fruits and vegetables. Building membership to 800 families over a half dozen years was one huge promotional task in the other California, where a CSA acronym went virtually unrecognized. This dozen-year project, serving as personal farmers to hundreds of local families, turned out to be the most rewarding, most profitable, and ultimately the most exhausting experience of our entire careers. Weekly boxes, of which we delivered 51 each year, thrive on diversity and novelty, so we launched into new crop experimentation, expanding our repertoire to near 50 over several years. Most gratifying was broadening our customers' appreciation of vegetables they'd never eaten and introducing the concept of seasonality to diets. That took a lot of hand-holding. We invested immense effort into a much-praised weekly newsletter in which Denise adapted recipes to the exact contents and quantities of each box's vegetable treasure. Well, I spent the best part of one day each week researching and writing a 400-word farther afield column on some salient topic from the food and agriculture world. Though T&D Willey Farms CSA consistently netted some $100,000 annually, conducted as a business separate from our farm, in 2015, we handed it off to Fresno Food Commons, who continue its operation in the local region. We needed the rest. CSA at its peak never purchased more than 15% of our 75 acres of production. Meticulously tended by 50 full-time year-round staff, the farm averaged $40,000 in gross sales per acre for many years, bringing up a total of $3 million in annual revenues rather consistently. However, a big gross does not a net make. Net income varied from a low of $60,000 to $300,000 in a rare bell ringer year. Back in the late 1980s, when Denise and I were worrisomely feted as successful farmers, our stated mission from God was to demonstrate that a couple could earn a decent middle-class living entirely from farming, arguing that growing people's food is a sacred responsibility, the reward for which should be commensurate with any profession, doctor, lawyer, pastor, or professor. We've been blessed in having accomplished that goal and serving as some example to aspiring farmers. But what does the future hold for practicing farmers, a generation or two younger than we? 40 years ago, an ever-expanding community of growers dedicated to biological farming and uniquely willing to share successes and failures with each other gradually bootstrapped the fastest growing segment of today's American food marketplace. Biologically intensive agriculture has reached a critical mass, poised to capture the innovation momentum from a toxic chemical industry that has been dominant since the World War II era. The results we've witnessed on our several T&D Willey farms over the last 30 years of steadily improving soil and crop quality, a declining need for acute responses to pest or disease outbreaks, and increasing yields have been most gratifying. The profound lesson one must learn as a successful biological or organic farmer is that we're not out there battling nature to produce a crop. Rather, we are stewarding or finessing a natural process, encouraging biological allies who in turn restrain potential enemies. Abandoning monoculture for a polyculture approach is an immense advantage in this effort as a farm begins to mimic the complexity of natural ecologies. Monocultures are brittle. Polycultures are much more resilient and buffered against complete failure, both biologically and economically. However, had any of 3 children chosen to follow in our footsteps, an honor they have respectfully declined, it would be difficult to predict success for this farming model over another generation. High diversity farms like T&D Willey's, growing as many as 50 to 100 crops on a modest acreage that have characterized California's organic movement for 4 decades, are in jeopardy. The immense variety and mimicry of natural ecosystems that awards biological stability on our farms, allowing us to eschew chemicals, also condemns us to labor inefficiency. Our multi-crop farm was hopelessly labor-intensive, until recently hosting just short of 60 full-time year-round employees on 75 acres. Well, factoring in seasonal summer help, that calculates to 1 person per acre. Although said acres were quite productive, each yielding $40,000 in annual vegetable sales, $30,000 of that went to pay wages, benefits, and payroll taxes for its caretaker farmhand. Employee compensation approached an extraordinary 75% of T&D Willey Farm's total revenue several years back when minimum wage was $8 an hour, not today's $10. In several more years, farms will be legally mandated to pay $15. We were certainly not the most efficient labor managers in organic farmdom, aspiring as we did to superlative quality standards. But I've not come across any farm like ours that spends less than 50% of revenues on labor. More than a few in this very room of my generation or beyond were born and raised on 40 to 80 acre raisin or tree fruit farms hereabouts that provided middling, but by no means luxuriant economic and social circumstances for families who in many cases sent children to college or university. A 21st century redo of Goldschmidt's farm scale study would yield very different statistics than those evidenced in 1944 Dinuba. My East Side Valley farm town, Madera, was a similar bastion of modest scale farming in that year. But today's neighbors, many legitimate family operators, commonly own or manage 1,000 to 5,000 acres of trees and vines. The largest orchard vineyard operation on Madera's east side encompasses a stunning 22,000 acres. So, George Ballas's biggies are no longer confined to our valley's far west, and they are by no means all faceless corporate entities, if ever they were. Soon after rosy riveters were chased home to mop floors and produce babies, post-war government and industry leaders colluded on a cheap food policy that would usher millions off the land to labor at factory assembly lines for corporations that enjoyed a hegemonic advantage in resupplying a broken world with manufactured goods. Resultant farm mechanization, chemical intensification, and consolidation has since halved America's rural population, leaving our nation's midsection, its last agrarian democratic stronghold, littered with thousands of near ghost towns. Fractious former Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz's infamous 1970s admonition to get big or get out was damn near universally heeded by any survivor on the land over this tumultuous period. Most got out. And I can't see any purpose or value in demonizing or vilifying those who didn't on the sole basis of farm scale. Water grabbers could easily echo the words former Senator S.I. Hayakawa spoke in reference to the Panama Canal. We stole it fair and square. They and long collaborating government operatives might further argue that reclamation law's broad social benefit requirement is fulfilled by the torrents of cheap, albeit subsidized, food flowing into American cities from Western irrigated lands. By any stretch of the imagination, could Jefferson's prescription for small farm American democracy ever reascend to its former prominence over our nation's productive landscapes? Not without legions of tenacious back-to-the-landers, armed with access to capital, appropriate technical education, and support from some enlightened government food policy that embodies preferential option for modest-scale agriculture. Dinesh and I are honored to be amongst a small community of farmers in this room, numbered fewer than the fingers on one hand, who've successfully navigated our small craft against an agribusiness flood tide over a generation. We chose a recent gathering of Placer and Nevada County small farm colleagues to make the first public announcement of our imminent retirement from production agriculture. Having seeded nothing in the ground since August, when a waning eggplant harvest winds up, we will hang up our T&D Willey Farm spurs after 35 years. I have come to believe that the pioneering organic farmers of my generation, from here on out, shoulder a greater responsibility to mentor and pass along knowledge and experience to a new generation of cultivators than we do to continued production. Before you give me the hook, I'd like to discuss something of more particular and immediate concern to this region's farmers and greater community. Last to the table Westlands stumbles toward ruin for lack of water. 200,000 acres fallowed, while million-dollar desperation deep wells drawing seawater quality bilge from below 1,000-foot depths sears the leaves off almond groves as it slakes their thirst. Growers in such dire circumstances who can locate any for sale acre-foot of surface water that carries even a $2,000 extortionist price tag are often found paying it. When we relocated our farm north to Madera in 1995, I did so with considerable trepidation around entering a federally managed San Joaquin River watershed and leaving behind your more generous, locally controlled Kings River Basin. Those fears proved true when Madera Irrigation District canals remained dusty dry throughout 2014 and 2015 for the first time since our Central Valley Project's Bryant Division began delivering water 7 decades back. 4 irrigation districts straddling the San Joaquin River's mid-valley course, just a few miles west of T&D Willey Farms, enjoy that river's most generous water rights, having inherited these from Miller and Lux's empire. Our United States Department of Interior's Depression-era Central Valley project exchanged sacrosanct San Joaquin riparian water, irrigating those districts' 250,000 acres, for a guaranteed supply pumped south from the Delta. A then liberated San Joaquin River flow enabled Friant Dam's 1939 construction, diverting new surface water to some million east side acres through the CVP's Friant-Kern Canal, from Chowchilla to Kern County. Should any circumstance ever jeopardize exchange contractors' generous Delta Mendota canal supplies, east side orchardists and vineyards, some ignorant of history's legal entanglements, forcibly relinquish borrowed water to Henry Miller's rightful inheritors. When the Bureau ultimately reneged on that promise, we lost our water. I often remind farming friends that I left behind on the Kings River system that they live in a water Disneyland compared to those of us reliant on federal San Joaquin water. Fortuitously, irrigation boosters hereabouts engaged the less encumbering U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, eager to keep busy after a war, who gladly built Pine Flat on the Kings for a simple repayment of costs, turning management of its water resource back to your local community. Oh, and by the way, doing an end run around the 160-acre limitations. There may be no escaping the bitter dilemma in which we are ensnared on the troubled San Joaquin, but you'd best protect and treasure today's cooperative community management on this sister stream to our south. Governors Brown are all about erecting memorials to their legacies that will stand the test of ages, as did the pyramids. Edmund G. Pat Brown's was the State Water Project. Son Jerry's is the Twin Tunnel California Water Fix Project, which faces fierce opposition from Delta agricultural and environmental interests, loath to see less water coursing through their domain. To mute that opposition, Governor Jerry appears to have fixed his gaze on the rich water endowments of our San Joaquin Valley neighbors to the north. A personally appointed State Water Resources Control Board currently plans to appropriate between 40% and 60% of Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced River flows for Bay Delta enhancement. Next month's official hearings on this proposal, scheduled in Stockton, Modesto, and Merced, are guaranteed to produce fireworks. Kings River Basin irrigators currently sit in the catbird seat, drawing water from the only major stream disconnected by its ancient geography from Central and Northern California's near ubiquitous San Francisco Bay drainage system. It seems that only some credible initiative to rewater Tulare Lake threatens surface water supplies drawing from the Kings, which would otherwise acquire distinction as constituting a relative water oasis in an otherwise drying San Joaquin Valley. However, as groundwater pumping restrictions prescribed by the California's 2014 Sustainable Groundwater Management Act take effect over the next several years, those in districts rich in Class 1 supplies should have little to worry about, while those in Class 2 districts or outside any irrigation district service area at all have reason to worry over keeping vineyards and orchards thriving. Our tale of two rivers carries over into groundwater management, with most farmers on the Kings reporting very modest water level declines in wells over several years of drought. Contrast that to our Madera farm, purchased 20 years ago, that has experienced a 75-foot water table decline in those 2 decades. Knowledgeable Madera Irrigation District directors predict, privately, and and maybe too pessimistically, that 5 years from now, farmers within district boundaries will have water adequate for 2/3 of their acres, while farmers outside the district, dependent solely on pumping, will only be allowed to extract water enough for half of their acreage.
What could we do if we wanted to say, yeah, we want to do what you recommend?
Well, in the Kings, I mean, there are many organizations, the Kings Water Conservation District, the Kings Water District Association, and your own individual irrigation districts. I think you need to go to their meetings, be aware of what's going on, particularly with this groundwater. We're just about finished with the period of forming the groundwater sustainability agencies. They're called the GSAs. The next thing comes is the groundwater sustainability plans, the GSPs. So the local district is going to come up with their own plan to, by 20 years from 2014, the water table here will be managed so that no more is taken out each year than was replenished from the winter and whatever groundwater recharge you accomplished in the previous year. So that's going to be a very dynamic issue. We've never been constrained that way in all of time. Our water table here, our aquifer, is one of the most fabulous aquifers on the face of the planet. It represents 25% of all the irrigated agriculture in the United States of America. And probably the water that we're drawing on, some of that, most farmers are not even allowing scientists to do fossil dating of the water, because we would find out that the water we're pumping may have been rainfall of hundreds of years ago, maybe not 1,000 years ago. And so we're drawing on a legacy that was put here by the natural system when none of these rivers were dammed, and the land would, the valley would be flooded, and all that water would recharge into the aquifer. So get involved in the process, and and I know some of my friends that farm here are in areas that are not water irrigation district service areas. They have good groundwater. Your groundwater in this area is maybe only average 80, 100 feet deep, where in our area now it's 200 feet plus. But that doesn't, just because it's there and it can be drawn in, doesn't mean you're going to have the legal right to do so, maybe even 5 years in the future without some pretty significant restrictions. So I don't know if any of the districts are going to allow people to join, might allow certain areas to join, probably not, but basically you got to get involved. You got to go to these ding-dong meetings that are tedious and boring, and but that's where the action takes place. If the state determines that a local district's groundwater management plan is bogus, then the state will take over the whole process and write your district a groundwater management plan and implement it from Sacramento, which obviously nobody wants to do. So I would say if you're dependent on groundwater pumping, you really want to get involved in this, the implementation of the steps in this groundwater management. Let me borrow Edwin R. Murrow's iconic sign-off by wishing good night, good luck.